When you overlook the meaning of something, it can easily become hidden, even in plain sight. Its obviousness doesn't matter, its meaning is not apparent. Sitting there for all to see, we just don't see it. One example is the Cleveland Cultural Gardens. A 2-mile stretch of Martin Luther King Drive connects Lake Erie to the back of the Cleveland Museum of Art. It winds its way through Rockefeller Park, intertwined with Doane Brook. Along the way are interconnected gardens with green signs identifying a single nation or ethnic group as its patron. Collectively, they're known as the Cleveland Cultural Gardens. Individually, they grow as testaments to cultural heroes, a way for nations and ethnic groups to celebrate their inspirational historical figures with statues and plaques. They began 100 years ago celebrating Shakespeare, and there are 35 or so gardens with more on the way. But despite their acreage and prominent history, the gardens eventually became overlooked and got lost. And when we lose public spaces to indifference or shifting social tides, it diminishes us, separating us from historical ideals.
The gardens, they just remind you of your entire past.
History is both our great triumphs and our great downfalls. And if we don't remember that, we'll just keep failing over again. And the garden is just a reminder to all of us. And it really is important to look into others' histories. It builds a great empathy for others.
Relationships change as soon as you tap into someone's past. I think communities change that way.
The point of our gardens is that all of the nationalities work together in harmony, and even though in history we may have been enemies, we aren't here. We all love our cultures, we honor the culture of each other's countries, and the past fades away, and we work together for appreciation of what each nationality has to offer society and the world.
The cultural and ethnic heritage of the city is so part and parcel of what Cleveland is all about, and this recognizes and celebrates that.
That they actually represent peace to all men.
The other gardens, they're just pieces of us, even if we don't know it.
In 1897, John D. Rockefeller deeded parkland to Cleveland, part of his massive and conspicuous philanthropy. Out of that came the Cultural Gardens Federation 3 decades later. The idea was for loud and wholehearted celebrations of European culture, perhaps to offset the horrors and brutishness of World War I. The nations who first planted gardens here had battled over there in trenches, swallowed nerve gas, died in the millions. After this war to end all wars, the map of Europe was significantly redrawn. No more Austro-Hungarian or Ottoman empires, both the German and Russian empires dismantled. Immigrants fleeing devastation arrived in America, joined flourishing ethnic communities, and started creating splendid exhibitions of their goodness. They poured concrete, laid stone, erected statues, and planted pretty shrubbery in garden plots, rooting ideals in the soil of the New World. By 1935, Poland, Hungary, Italy, Germany, Slovenia, and Czechoslovakia all established cultural gardens. There were also Hebrew and American gardens, and one representing the Federation itself. There were regular parades, speeches, and picnics throughout the gardens, attracting many thousands, communicating the end of World War I's savagery. But it was a short-lived peace. Heightened European nationalism and the rise of fascism sparked World War II. Once again, the struggle for domination trumped the idea of gardens filled with flowery words. After 1940, recognition of what the gardens meant dwindled, as did the number of people invested in keeping them vibrant and alive. From the Finnish garden in 1958 to the Indian garden in 2005, there were just 5 new ones created. Less gardens in 50 years than in its first 10 years of existence. The growth of the gardens as showcases for peace and togetherness wilted. The 50s and 60s brought the Cold War and the heat of struggles for racial equality and social evolution. Military rhetoric was inserted in garden commemoration speeches. and aggressive declarations of cultural identity were spray painted on garden walls. As a result of these huge political, social, and cultural shifts, the gardens became more about nostalgia, its figurative dirt getting tired. By the turn of the century, there was talk of moving them out of Cleveland.
Everybody knows that Cleveland Cultural Gardens are a hidden gem, that we drive by it every day, some people twice a day.
You usually just drive by and you're not involved in it. You just see it and you go by and you don't know what goes on here.
I think it is a wonderful resource that is so untouched and so unused by so many Clevelanders. It's a shame.
They mean a lot to me, the gardens do, because I remember driving through here with my mom and dad, brother and sister.
When it was called, Liberty Boulevard, way back then.
It was like a family outing, so it's always been special to me in that regard.
The Cleveland Public School System brought you down to the cultural gardens so you would learn the history, because you never know where you're going unless you know where you come from.
There comes a time in their life when they say, I want to belong, and I want to belong to my heritage, because we all have a heritage from somewhere in this world.
So they would bring you down to the gardens and show you exactly, the diversity of the city of Cleveland, why the gardens exist, who built the gardens, and the whole lights. And then when you thought the fact that they named it, Martin Luther King Boulevard, and you just think about all the greatness that goes on right here, and they brought us down here for an education. So that's how I knew about it.
I first came across the gardens in their declining years while visiting family. I was intrigued, but not enough to research their history or find out what they meant. Nobody I talked to seemed to know or care about them. Most passersby I saw ignored them, but they resonated for me. Years later, I moved to Cleveland and noticed that the gardens had multiplied in a way that seemed all of a sudden, but of course was not. Like a garden cycle itself, these dormant places were coming alive. The nearby University Circle district was booming, and Cleveland's leaders started paying attention. New gardens appeared, celebrating cultural heroes from India, Azerbaijan, Syria, Croatia, Albania, Armenia, Latvia, all in the last 10 years. Almost 25% of the gardens are new in the last decade. Now there are more than 60 busts and statues commemorating Chopin, Shakespeare, Copernicus, Madame Curie, Mother Teresa, Dante, Dvorak, and Gandhi. Those who did not study war or want to dominate others, instead those who were passionate about music and art and poetry and humanity.
These gardens were not meant for politics at all.
If you notice on the plaques that are dedicated, we have no politicians there.
Garden supporters urge celebrating once again the idea that cultural heroes transcend national borders. There are now bigger festivals, opera in the Italian garden, refurbished and expanded gardens, like the new part of the Hungarian garden. It's clear more people are getting it, the idea of coming out to explore the gardens and see what's happening.
We're starting finally to wake up.
In recent years, it has changed for the better.
And you see right today, we're at this One World Festival and everybody's finally celebrating not just the gardens, it's what the gardens represent. They represent Cleveland's cultural legacy, Cleveland's deep cultural roots.
And you can be able to bring your kids and your grandkids down here and say, hey, this is where we come from.
I think it's going to really make a change in how we see our community. We got something the others don't have. It's right here.
So a day like today where people can actually come out and see them and see what they're all about, it's wonderful. Rockefeller did a great job.
So to know that you've got that right here is just fantastic.
And it's just really beautiful just to see it all.
To me, the gardens are amazeries, places of wonder. They are reminders to be mindful of what's right in front of me, to resist overlooking, to be present. I'm intentional in my garden connections, riding bikes there with my son, investigating at the speed of wander. I bring out-of-town visitors to the gardens, eventually getting married in the Rockefeller greenhouse at one end of the chain. And it's right to say chain, because that's the essence of the gardens, a chain connecting immigrant dreamers from 100 years ago to present-day dreamers, those who remain unwilling to surrender universal wishes for a true brotherhood of man, as sappy sweet as that sounds. The gardens are truly one of those things hidden in plain sight. They are now healthier than they've been in decades, even though our connection to them will never be what it was. But that's okay, and it isn't what matters most. What matters most is that we see them and try to understand what they represent. Things hidden in plain sight have their own kind of power, and noticing them unleashes this power, like a new bud appearing, or the rich earthy smell of growing possibilities.